Hi, my name is Amanda David, and this is my sociology capstone project. My capstone project is about British colonization and slavery's effect on women's rights in Barbados. Barbados is an island nation in the Eastern Caribbean. So, to start off some back history, the very first inhabitants of Barbados were Arawak and Carib indigenous tribes who migrated from mainland South America to the island of Barbados. The very first Europeans to set foot in Barbados were actually the Portuguese on their way to Brazil, but they didn't really have much of a lasting effect or really colonized Barbados. Uh, the first British settlers came in the early 1600s, and the first recorded evidence of women being abused is the women being sexually assaulted by the English settlers and also being killed through bioterrorism. So, to purposely get the island of Barbados themselves, English settlers would purposefully infect the indigenous people with illnesses they knew they weren't immune to, such as smallpox, the flu, and the common cold. So, soon after the British first came, they imported slaves from West Africa to work primarily on plantations to farm sugarcane and bananas. That was the main uh, industry source in Barbados. And the women slaves, they had they would do all kinds of work. They would work on the fields, planting and harvesting crops, and they would also work inside the house. But this would oftentimes be determined based on their skin color. So the darker female slaves were considered to be more masculine, so they felt like they should be in the fields, uh, farming and harvesting, while, while the slave owners thought the lighter skinned slaves were more feminine and more attractive, so they kept them in the house to do laundry, cooking, cleaning, and taking care of the slave owners' children. And so this kind of mindset sort of persists today in Barbados. Many people consider lighter skin to be more attractive, to be more feminine, and many of the prominent women in Barbados today are actually of lighter skin. The enslaved women in Barbados were seen as objects, not human beings, and many of them were unfortunately sexually assaulted by slave owners. It's thought that approximately at least a third of slave owners sexually assaulted one of their female slaves at least once in their lifetime. The slave women would often be raped due to the slave owners wanting to impregnate them so they could get a free slave, because it would be cheaper for them to impregnate their slave and for the slave to give birth to another slave instead of buying a slave for the slave trade. So, but women, they got tired of this treatment and they rebelled. The enslaved women in Barbados, they had a huge part in slave rebellions, and what they would do first, they would educate themselves, even though they weren't legally allowed to read and write. They learned to do that. They taught the children and men how to do that so they could learn about other slave rebellions going on in the Caribbean. And what women would do whenever there'd be a slave rebellion is they would sometimes poison their slave owners through their cooking, and they would also create an escape route through the children's hair through their braids. So they would braid the children's hair in certain patterns so they could know where to walk in order to escape the plantation or where to attack. So that was really clever. So eventually, slavery was abolished in Barbados in the 1840s. And one of the next big fights was the suffrage movement, and women eventually got the right to vote in Barbados in 1944. Barbados left the it left the British Empire in 1966, and it became its own independent country separate from the United Kingdom. And this is really a huge deal when it comes to women's rights, because they were able to reject a lot of the British ideology about women, especially a lot of the British Christian ideology that women should be subservient to men, that women should serve men. So what happened was the government, they created programs to help get women to work and to get more women into secondary school and more women into post-secondary education. And because of that, the amount of women in education in the workplace skyrocketed, and for the first time in the late 20th century, most women were working instead of staying at home, cooking and cleaning and taking care of children. In 1986, abortion was legalized in Barbados, and Barbados is actually one of the most liberal countries in the Caribbean where it comes to abortion, where you can get an abortion for any reason. Most of the region, you have to have a very specific reason, so it would be rape or incest or a life-threatening condition. Due to efforts from the government to empower women and to get women more involved in leadership roles, roughly a third of the government in Barbados today is led by women. And the very first female prime minister was Mia Mottley, who was elected in 2018. And she has really done amazing work, and for women in Barbados, and a lot of people now have a much more positive opinion of women being leaders in Barbados due to her leadership. Many people see a woman leader as being more likely to move the country forward and to create social change, and she has. Which one thing she really has done is fight for black feminism and look at the intersectionality between race and gender, and how not just being a woman affects your life experiences, but also what it's like being a black woman or a woman of color, which makes up the majority of women in Barbados. And she also is fighting for reparations from the United Kingdom in order to invest into the economy and infrastructure in Barbados in order to become more progressive. Barbados actually separated from the British Commonwealth in October of 2021, and they got their first president, which happened to be female president, Sandra Mason. So women in Barbados have definitely come a long way since British colonization, and they've really had a huge impact.